Good afternoon, Mets fans, and welcome to a Monday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and it's been a while. Haven't been able to record a video in a while. I've been on the road. Had every intention of recording one last Tuesday, and things got away from me, and I didn't get a chance to do that. So I'm back today to talk about things that have gone on and transpired in Metsville since last Monday. Particularly surrounding the managerial search, and I'm going to give out some homework. Yes, some homework. Very lazy of me, but I'm going to go into that on today's show. So without further ado, let's get started. As I mentioned a week ago, I'm actually really glad that the Mets didn't end up making the playoffs, if only because I was so busy this month with travel that I don't know that I would have been able to watch many of the games as intently as I would certainly like to, and I certainly would not have been able to go to any of them since I was anywhere but home for most of the last month. So I was able to watch a lot of the playoffs come and go here and there. I didn't get to watch many of the games in their entirety, but I did certainly not project the Nationals to win the pennant. And that's sort of where I'm going to kick off here today, that the Nationals, who really the Mets took pretty easy care of this year to the tune of a 12-7 record on the season, that's the team that's representing the National League in the World Series. And it's one of those getting hot at the right moment kind of teams, where they won like 15 of their last 16 or 16 of their last 17 games to get to the point where they are today, waiting now for the Houston Astros in the World Series. I picked the Dodgers to win the National League pennant. That did not happen. And you know, you can talk about it as much as you want. As a Mets fan, who do you root for? You know, it was tough in the National League because we had four teams that were pretty much universally disliked as Mets fans. For me, the least dislikable, the most likable of the bunch. I don't even want to say that they were likable, but I was rooting for the Dodgers. They had the least impact for me on the Mets. In recent years. So I hate the Nats. I've made no mistakes and no bones about that. I do not like the Nats. That being said, I'm really happy for them. If only because it's ironic that Bryce Harper's gone, and now they not only win their first postseason series, but they represent the National League in the World Series. They win the pennant, and Bryce Harper is sitting in Philly, potentially keeping his promise of bringing a title back to DC. So I think that's kind of funny when you get down to it, that Harper is sitting at home with his newborn child, and the Nats, his former team, are playing for the World Series. In the American League, I did pick the Astros. Certainly not a difficult pick to make. They were the best team in the American League, rather, and certainly they were the best team in baseball this season. So they deserve where they are. They played a hell of a series with the Yankees. The Yankees really pushed the Astros, but the starting pitching for the Yankees just wasn't able to, and is not able to, compete with a team that has a solid rotation, and that's been a problem for the Yankees for a couple of years now. And this year in particular, where Cashman flat out said, like, we did not think Marcus Stroman would have been a difference maker for us. I wonder how things might have been different had Marcus Stroman been able to start this past game as opposed to it being a bullpen game. Because these bullpens built the way they are these days, and make no mistake about it, the Yankees absolutely have one of the best bullpens in baseball, but those things work in a short series. Typical 3-game set over the course of a regular season. But in the playoffs, where you're playing 5 and 7 games against the same teams, against the same lineups, against the same coaches, in that 4th game, in that 5th game, when you start seeing the same relievers over and over again, some of their things get exposed. Some flaws get exposed, some ticks get exposed, and that's what happened with the Yankees. I mean, look no further than Adam Ottavino, who was one of the best relievers in baseball, but just couldn't get himself together in the playoffs. So interestingly to see where the Yankees finished their season, just short of the pennant, and solidifying and closing the book on the first decade that the Yankees do not represent the American League in the World Series. The Mets are the only team from New York to play in a World Series in the decade of the 2010s. That's kind of cool. So anyhow, I do think the Astros are going to beat the Nationals, but it's going to be a hell of a series. The pitching matchups are going to be really fun. This is a good young teams on both sides, good lineups on both sides. So it'll be an age-old tale of pitching versus offense to see which one ends up winning out in the World Series itself. So where do things stand with the Mets? That's really the question. And like I said, I've been away, but not a whole lot's happened. The Mets have been interviewing candidates for their managerial search. They've interviewed 416 people now, I think is the number. I'm exaggerating, of course, but they've interviewed a lot of people. They're bringing back four guys for second interviews. Joe Girardi, Carlos Beltran, Eduardo Perez, and Tim Bogar. And the homework I mentioned earlier is that I want you guys to go out, if you haven't already done so, and listen to a couple of podcasts that are available. One is Locked On Mets. Ryan Finkelstein hosts Locked On Mets. It's a daily podcast, and it's pretty short. And it was either last week or the week before he had a nice little piece where he talked about Carlos Beltran and why he thinks Carlos Beltran would be a really good fit for Mets manager. And earlier today, he talked about Tim Bogar being an interesting candidate for Mets manager. And I have to be honest, in both of those instances, I was sort of sour on both guys. The fact that he brings up in his podcast really changed my mind a little bit about both of those guys. So worth going out and taking a listen to what Ryan Finkelstein had to say about Beltran and Bogar. Bogar in particular, frankly, the resume that he has, I didn't realize it was as substantial as it is. So worth paying attention to. The other one is one that I've talked about a lot. It's the For All You Kids Out There podcast. It's a great podcast. It's really funny. Jeff Paternostro and Jarrett Seidler do a really good job hosting that podcast. If you like wrestling, there's a whole chunk of the podcast every time that's dedicated to pro wrestling. I just enjoy their dynamic with each other, and I think they're really funny. But they both happen to write for Baseball Prospectus, and they've got a lot of interesting information available to themselves. They have connections. They talk a lot today about Beltran, about Girardi. And again, I think it's just worth listening to. I have not finished their current podcast, so I was actually listening to that one this morning and then this afternoon on my way to pick up my lunch. But they made some really interesting comments in the first 15 or so minutes about Beltran and Girardi that I think are worth paying attention to. So where do I see this unfolding? My personal opinion is I want Joe Girardi as the manager of this team. However, that being said, I have to be completely honest. The final four candidates that seem to be available or on the short list now, Girardi, Beltran, Bogar, and Perez, each one of them has a really interesting backstory, and I don't know that any one of them is going to be worse than Mickey Callaway, and that's the key for me, is that they have to do better than what they had. And in-game managing wise, Beltran has no experience as a manager, but he makes up for that in some other ways. Perez, similar, but not really. He's got in-game managing experience. He's got in-game coaching experience. Girardi, his resume speaks for itself. And Bogar has a really impressive resume. So I guess where I'm getting at with this is such a chicken shit way out of this. I'm no longer going to be pissed if it's not Girardi. And before, I was going to be pissed if it wasn't Girardi. Honestly, I was going to be really upset if Girardi wasn't the manager. Now I'm sort of okay with any one of these guys coming on board, because I just feel like each one of them brings something different to the table. And all of them, hopefully, make up for some of the things that Mickey Callaway lacked as the leader of this club on the field. So where I'm looking at now and what I'm looking for now is for the Mets to make a decision, for this not to drag on a whole lot longer. Look, the Angels have made it abundantly clear they've gone out and signed Joe Maddon. That was a one-and-done sort of deal there for the Angels. So it's not like the Mets can't make a decision and announce a decision about who their new manager is going to be in the next couple of days. It does not have to wait for the World Series to be over. Clearly, the Angels didn't wait on their end, so why should the Mets, is my point with that. So I'm hoping to see in the next day or two this list go down to 2, and we find out who the new manager is going to be shortly thereafter. The nice part about what's happened so far, frankly, is that there have been very few leaks. We haven't heard anything definitive from any of the reporters, which means the front office has been pretty mum about this. They haven't been disclosing their plans to anybody. I think that's important. One of the biggest problems this team has had over the last several years is that someone in the front office is always leaking shit out. And if they can sort of plug that leak, that's going to make things a lot better from a process standpoint for the Mets, where they don't have to worry about deflecting and being covert about some things that might be out and that they don't want out. If they've plugged the leaks and the information is not getting out into the public, that's a huge win for the Mets. So kudos to Brody and his crew for seemingly buttoning up some of those leaks that have been plaguing the team for a number of years. So my schedule for the next couple of days is not that different from what it's been these last few weeks. I'm going to be out of town for the latter part of this week. I don't know that I'm going to be back tomorrow. I know one of the things I wanted to do last week was do a summary of my game balls and goats, and it's been twice that I've really tried to do that and haven't been able to for several different reasons. So I think what I'm going to do with that is, as opposed to trying to get a video recorded, I'm just going to write a blog post and summarize it there, and I'll link to it on Twitter, and I'll also link to it hopefully in this video comment below, where you can see where my blog is and you can check it out, bookmark it, and see what I've got to say about the game balls and goats. Basically, where I sort of handed out an MVP and LVP for the Mets based on individual game performances totaled up across 162 games, which I tracked all year long like an idiot. But I'll be happy to share that with you guys when it's ready. And I'm going to do that with a blog instead of with a video. So keep an eye out for that over the next day or so. As far as my next video goes, I'll probably come back next Monday, so a week from today, at which point I think the World Series will be over, because I do think the Astros are going to handle the Nats pretty easily. By the way, the one reason I think that is that the Nats have been sort of sitting around cooling off, while the Astros have been forced to play really gritty, hard-fought games against a tough Yankees team. So the Astros have more momentum on their side right now heading into the World Series than the Nats do. It's always been a kiss of death for teams, no matter how hot they are. When they have to sit around for 2, 3, 4 days, Scherzer is going to be going on extra days rest. It's just a recipe, not necessarily a recipe for success when that happens, at least in my opinion. So when I return, it'll probably be a week from now, and again, the World Series should be over, and we'll talk about the winners, anything that stands out from that, and hopefully by then the Mets will have a manager named, and I can do a little bit more of a deep dive into who that is and what I think about that going forward. So that'll be it for today. I will be back in a couple of days. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter. You can check out my blog. Twitter is at Mr_Met. It's MISTER_MET. As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And until we speak again, let's go Mets.